Welcome back to the Nerdy Grail and welcome to the 10th video in this ranking every episode from every Doctor's series. Now this is the big one, the long one, the one that I've probably been most looking forward to doing, because in today's video I am going to be ranking every single 4th Doctor story from the Tom Baker era. And as you can see, I've got all my Doctor Who, the collection sets from Tom Baker behind me, with the collection season 13 up for pre-order now, so we can almost complete our Tom Baker years. Tom Baker was the very first Doctor I ever watched. The Hand of Fear was the very first Doctor Who story I ever watched. And Tom Baker is my Doctor, personally. I love him. So I'm going to try my best to not give a biased opinion here. But I must admit, you know, Tom being in the role for 7 years, he's got some absolutely fantastic stories. But that's not to say that his era was perfect. There is a fair few stories, as you will see on this list, that I actually find aren't actually that good. So, like I've done in the previous videos in this list, I do it in a tier list format. I started with the 15th Doctor, played by Ncuti Gatwa. I've worked my way down to where I am now with Tom Baker, and eventually we will get to William Hartnell. So remember, with all these lists as well, this is just my personal opinion. I'm sure there'll be episodes on this list that you think are amazing, that I've put as bad, or episodes that I've put as amazing that you think are bad. But that's okay. So, without any further ado, let's jump straight into this list. Grab a bag of jelly babies, because this is going to be a long one, as I rank every single 4th Doctor story. Okay, and here is my ranking every 4th Doctor episode tier list. And as you can see, there are a lot of stories to get through, from Robot all the way to Logopolis. We've got our 5 categories like usual, so top of the shop, so these are the best of the best. You may be a Doctor, but I am the Doctor. The definite article, you might say, from Robot. I say, what a wonderful butler, he's so violent. That's the great stories, or the good ones, from City of Death. We got There's No Point in Being Grown Up If You Can't Be Childish Sometimes. That's from Robot, and they're your okay stories. So not great, but not bad either. Then we've got, you know, you're the perfect example of the inverse ratio between the size of the mouth and the size of the brain. So these are the bad stories. So stories that are not terrible, but they're not good. So they can't make it an okay, so they're just bad. And then we've got, if we don't find that pod before it germinates, it'll be the end of everything. Everything, do you understand? Even your pension, from the Seeds of Doom. And these are awful, terrible stories that I just can't watch, or I struggle to watch. So let's begin with Robot. So to start with season 12, Tom Baker, I would say Robot for me is a very, very good story. I would say it definitely belongs in great or good. I wouldn't quite say it's top of the shop, but I would say for the first story of a Doctor, it does everything right. It's like a 3rd Doctor story, but with the 4th Doctor thrown in. You know, Tom Baker does a fantastic job giving a new quirkiness to the Doctor. He really gels well with the Brigadier, with Benton, with Sarah Jane, who's just all come off the back of the Jon Pertwee era. The K1 robot is a fantastic design. I love the antagonists as well. I think Professor Kettlewell is a really interesting character who's sort of stuck between two sides. I think it's all, the pacing's really good. Obviously the effects are not very good, especially at the end where the robot grows to a massive size and carries Sarah Jane off, a bit like King Kong style. But overall, a fantastic story. And seeing Tom Baker ride Bessie, especially after coming from Jon Pertwee, I thought was a really nice touch. I love Robot. I think it's a fantastic start to a Doctor. Ark in Space easily goes in top of the shop. Ark in Space is a fantastic story. You know, Base Under Siege story, the Wirren are a terrifying creature, terrifying alien. I love obviously all the futuristic stuff up on the Ark, on the colony, you know, where the Wirren are invading. They've managed to take control of their leader, who slowly mutates into one of their own. Obviously, if you watch the original variant, obviously they call it like the bubble wrap creature, because when he shows his hand starting to get changed, I think his name's Noah, it does look like it's bubble wrap, and it probably was made of bubble wrap. But it's just so creepy, and the claustrophobic feel you get is brilliant. The 4th Doctor and Harry get a really good time to work together, because they're separated from Sarah for a little while. And I love the relationship between 4 and Harry. 4, Harry and Sarah are by far my favourite TARDIS team of the classic series. Just a really good story. If you're going to watch any Tom Baker story, I'd recommend watching Ark in Space. The Sontaran Experiment, I also think, is a great story. Short little two-parter, sandwiched between two dark stories of Ark in Space and Genesis of the Daleks. The Sontarans, well, a Sontaran, is on Earth doing experiments on this small group of humans in order to take the information back to his fleet so that the Sontarans can invade Earth and conquer the Earth. And it's just a simple little two-parter story. It's just a Doctor, Sarah and Harry trying to defeat one Sontaran and ruin his experiments. There's some fun, interesting experiments, you know, where they try to basically see how long someone can survive without food and water. They do another experiment where they like chain a guy to a rock and they make two other people hold a massive weight and increase it on his chest to see how much pressure he can have. They tie Sarah up and see what like the biggest fears that a human can have. It's really clever the way they do it. And yeah, I just like it. I love the fight between the Doctor and the Sontaran. And yeah, at the end of part 2 really gives me vibes back to the Time Warrior with Jon Pertwee. Very good story. Genesis of the Daleks, need I say more? Some people might say it's overrated. I don't personally think it's overrated. I think it is a fantastic Doctor Who story, fantastic Dalek story. This was actually the first Dalek story I ever watched, so I got to see how they began. You get to see the Doctor, Harry and Sarah travel to Skaro to try and prevent the Daleks from being created or change their makeup so that they will end up being less violent and aggressive creatures, you know, sent on a mission by the Time Lords. Nice thing to do, interesting. And they just get caught up with all the experiments that go on. You get to meet Davros for the first time, because Davros then appears in every Dalek story going forward in the classic era, which does get a bit tiresome. You know, the Daleks can cope without Davros, but I think Michael Wisher does a fantastic job as Davros. The character of Nyder, Davros' little henchman, is fantastic. The pacing is really good. It's really dark, really sinister. The Fourth Doctor has some brilliant speeches in this one, especially when talking to Davros, you know, about the virus that he's made in his laboratory. You know, could he, like, actually use it? Could he wipe out all life, you know, at the single press of a button or pressure of his finger? I think it's all brilliant. And the Doctor and Harry, again, separated from Sarah for a fair bit of the story, get some good time to shine. I think it's done really, really well. Love Genesis of the Daleks. Highly recommend it. Revenge of the Cybermen, a story that my fiance has watched with me 5 times and still cannot remember watching it with me. This is obviously definitely the weakest story of season 12. I don't think it's as bad as people say. I think it's an okay story. Is it good in terms of Cybermen stories? Probably not. It would be on the weaker end, which eventually, if I do like a ranking every Cyberman story, I'd probably say Revenge of the Cybermen would probably come towards the bottom. Because the Cybermen are way too emotional. They don't feel very threatening. They don't come into the story until the end of part 2 anyway. The Cybermats look really weird. It's on the space colony again that was in Ark in Space. The Cybermen invade the colony because they want to crash it into Voga in order to try and destroy Voga. Well, they start off by attaching bombs to the Doctor and the crew and send them off to Voga to try and blow it up. And when that fails, they then try to crash the space colony into the planet of Voga, because they want to defeat Voga because gold is their weakness, and if they get rid of that, then they can win a great cyber war. Interesting plot. Like I said, just the Cybermen don't really work, and the pacing's off because you've got the stuff that goes on Voga, and then you've got the Cybermen stuff. The Voga stuff is a little bit slow, so, you know, when it goes back to the Cybermen, it's great, and then when it goes to Voga, it's not as good. And like I said, the Cybermen, even though their design I quite like, their voices and the way they act are a bit off to me. But it's okay. It's an okay story, I think. Terror of the Zygons, I think this is a good story. Really looking forward to seeing like updated special effects and all on this story when the Doctor Who The Collection Season 13 box set comes out. I think it's a fantastic story. The Zygons have a much better design in classic series than in the modern era. Even though they're more or less the same, there's just something about the New Who ones that is a bit off to me, and I prefer the classic series design. And I think it's great. A great little send-off for Companion Harry, which is gutting that Harry leaves. He does come back in one story a little bit later on, but as the core companion, he leaves at the end of this one. It's the last full-time proper story with the Brigadier under Unit. in the classic era, which again, so it's like the end of an era. And it is just a fantastic story, and it's a fun story. Also, Tom Baker's little Scottish outfit that he wears at the start of the story is also a lot of fun. I'm glad they put that on the Blu-ray box set cover. Planet of Evil, I think that this is okay. I know a lot of people say it's not the best. It's probably the weakest of season 13, and I'd probably agree. But again, I think it is still a fun story. You know, antimatter monsters, almost giving you... You'll find something in season 13. There's a bit of a theme. Every story is sort of based on an old horror or an old sci-fi-esque show. I believe this one in particular was based on... had elements of Forbidden Planet, and also, in my opinion, a mixture of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde as well, with the professor who gets infected and contaminated with the antimatter and the matter that's on the planet, and starts like transforming into this antimatter creature, or this matter creature really. And it's also a Base Under Siege story as well, which they always work well for me, and they were like a core aspect of, say, the Patrick Troughton era. So I quite like it. Is it the best of the series? No. Again, pacing's a little bit off. I just think it's just not the best. And the characters, your core team of sub-characters also can get a bit annoying at times. Pyramids of Mars. Again, another story which some people might say is overrated. I think is fantastic. Obviously, we have Sutekh. And obviously, if you've watched the Tales of the TARDIS edition of Pyramids of Mars, I would say go back and watch this. The updated effects and the Tales of the TARDIS edition are really nice, but they cut out lots of really great content. They cut out a lot of the actual Pyramids of Mars bit with Sarah and the Doctor going through and solving all the puzzles. I'm like, come on, don't cut all that stuff out. But yeah, this is a fantastic story. Sutekh is at his best in this story. Ignore what came with Ncuti. That, in my opinion... it did Sutekh a disservice, if I'm honest. Sure, both Sutekh sat and did nothing for most of the story, but in this story, like I've said in a previous video I've done, he had a reason to sit and do nothing, whereas in the Ncuti one, he was a grand titan, and he still did nothing. This Sutekh, Gabriel Wolf, fantastic. The mummies are great. I think the smaller cast is great. I think Professor Scarman as your antagonist, apart from Sutekh, is also really good. Love the mummies, they're great. The visual effects, I think, were not too bad. Obviously, they got updated and did need a bit of an update, but overall, I thought they were pretty good. Pyramids of Mars definitely deserves the spot up top on the list. Also, Sarah wearing an outfit that Victoria wore. Interesting choice. Don't know why they did it, but it was interesting. Android Invasion. Unpopular opinion for some, but I actually quite like Android Invasion. I thought Android Invasion was a really good story. Really fun story. You know, I love duplicate stories, you know. Stories where the Doctor or companion have a duplicate, and you get duplicates of Benton, of Harry. Like I said, Harry does come back in this story briefly, because he had extra episodes he needed to fulfill, and so came back in this story. You got duplicates of the Doctor, duplicates of Sarah. You know, it is really, really interesting. These Krull creatures are basically trying to experiment and end up creating this little facsimile of an Earth town that Sarah went to once before. Sarah knows all the residents, but notices that something's off, and obviously they discover that it's actually just a test site, and they're not actually on Earth, and then the Krulls end up going to Earth, to the actual place to fulfill their plan. Like I said, fun story. Also, the Doctor's got an obsession with Ginger Pop in the story, so that's quite a fun little quirk. The Brain of Morbius. Again, I also think this is a fantastic story. Brilliant. Obviously, good take on Frankenstein in particular in this one. We find another rogue Time Lord who's somehow managed to find himself in a bit of a sticky situation, and so is trying to have a body rebuilt for him. Sarah goes blind for a decent portion of this story as well. You meet the Sisterhood of Khan, who come back a lot in the new series, to be fair. But yeah, this is where they originated, and I thought that was all done really, really well, really, really nicely. We also get, obviously, which was brought back in New Who, the Morbius Doctors, when the Doctor and Morbius sort of fight against each other, and you see flashbacks to previous incarnations of them both. It caused a lot of controversy, and it's still up in the arms what that's all about, but hey-ho, will that ever be officially, solved per se? I don't know, but it is what it is. It doesn't bother me too much now at this point, especially with everything we've had lately in Doctor Who, but I think The Brain of Morbius still stands as an absolute classic. Seeds of Doom, if you've seen like my ranking of classic Doctor Who stories, you know my thoughts on the Seeds of Doom. You know I adore the Seeds of Doom. Fantastic, brilliant story from start to finish. All the stuff up in the base up in, I can't remember if it's the South or North Pole, I can't remember exactly where it is, but in the Arctic landscape that they're in, the little base. Love all that stuff. And I love the stuff then when they go down to Earth and they're running around this giant mansion with this guy who's obsessed with plants and stuff. It's all a lot of fun. The Doctor's really weirdly aggressive in this story though. Like, he's very snappy and very sarcastic a lot with all the characters. Quite violent at times. There's a lot of violent imagery in this one as well. Like the Doctor almost gets turned into compost by put into like a compost compactor at one point. The Doctor snaps someone's neck at some point in this story. It's quite an odd episode, but surprisingly fun. And the Krynoid as a villain, definitely taken inspiration, the design, or a reused costume with slight alterations from the Axon monsters in the Jon Pertwee era. But I think overall, interesting idea. And I'm looking forward to watching it again on the Blu-ray box set. The Mask of Mandragora, I personally think this is okay. I'm not massive into The Mask of Mandragora. It's an okay story. And we're getting towards the end of Elizabeth Sladen's time on the show now, and you can notice that. They did decide to change the TARDIS console for this season, so obviously the weird, small, wooden, brownish TARDIS console room that you see, which is the most bizarre TARDIS console room ever. That was actually my first TARDIS console room, so I was quite surprised when I eventually saw, the classic white one that you see in most of the classic era, and then obviously watching the new series of Christopher Eccleston and David Tennant. But yeah, it is an okay story. It takes place in Italy, I believe. Yeah, it's okay. It's not bad, nothing terrible. The side characters are okay, but it's not really a truly memorable one for me, but it's okay. The Hand of Fear. Now, obviously, I did say Hand of Fear is my very first ever Doctor Who story, and there's a tiny bit of bias there, but I can't say that it is the best story of Doctor Who, so I can't put it in top tier. But I can say it is a fun story, and I did really enjoy it, and like I said, this is a personal one for me. As my very first ever Doctor Who story, with Eldrad being my first Doctor Who villain, obviously my first Doctor Who story being a departure for one of the most beloved companions in the show's history, Sarah Jane Smith, played by Elizabeth Sladen. I didn't know what I was getting myself in for. It's really sad that when I watched this, the impact of Sarah's departure didn't hit me anywhere near as much as it would now if I watched it. It still hit me though, and that's how much Elizabeth Sladen really gets you. It was the first story I ever saw of her, and I was gutted to see her leave at the end of the story. I was like, oh, they're parting ways. Oh, that's really sad. Tom Baker sold me instantly. Like I said, all the side characters are great. It is gutting, though, that for Sarah's last story, she is possessed for a great chunk of the story. So she's not actually herself. But I think that's one of the reasons why she leaves, because she is a bit fed up, like she says, of being, shot at, possessed, She's a bit fed up of all that, and that's why she's leaving. And she feels that the Doctor doesn't pay her enough attention anymore. But still a fantastic story, and I love it. The pacing's really good as well. And like I said, the old wooden, smallish console room was my first TARDIS console room. The Deadly Assassin. Again, I also think this is a really good story. My fiance recently watched it with me. She actually wasn't too keen on The Deadly Assassin. I can see why. Look, it is slow-paced, but I think it's interesting. It's one of the only Doctor Who stories in the classic series where the Doctor doesn't have a companion. It has the return of the Master after a very long time after the sad passing of Roger Delgado. Peter Pratt plays the first version of the Decayed Master in this, who's out to get the Doctor, to get revenge, so he assassinates the President and tries to frame the Doctor for it. The Doctor and him have a long confrontation in The Matrix, which all the stuff in The Matrix is done really, really well. I thought it was a really, really good story. Very dark. Obviously, this has the cliffhanger in part 3, where the Doctor is being drowned under the water, which got the attention of someone in particular who is known for trying to get shows, and in particular Doctor Who, cancelled for being violent. But yeah, I think it's an overall great story, if I'm honest, and I really like it. Face of Evil, I think this is okay. This was the first story to feature Louise Jameson as Leela, so a new companion who was going to take over after Sarah had obviously left the show. The Doctor returns to a planet where apparently he's been there before and left a bit of an influence because he's seen as the evil one, and there's statues of him. His carving is in the side of a mountain, and there's a higher species that like worship him, and he's known as like Zoanon. Apparently, like he went there, and when he stopped the previous catastrophe, you know, his mind got caught up in the computer, and it sort of had a bit of a split personality sort of thing going on. Interesting. He meets Leela, who is from a tribe, so we got a bit of a rough and ready companion, you know, a completely different sort of companion to Sarah. This one, you know, carrying weapons, isn't afraid to fight. The Doctor having to try and teach her as he goes along. I think it's really, really interesting. They have a decent blend together, totally different to Elizabeth Sladen's, but it's okay. Robots of Death. I really like Robots of Death. That's easily going towards top of the shop. Fantastic, fun story. Base Under Siege story of this group of robots that is, you know, rebelling and taking over, is being controlled by an unknown force and is killing off the crew. Bit of a whodunit, and the Doctor and Leela get framed for it. I think the design of the Voc robots is really, really good. They are creepy. Their voices, although can be seen as funny at times, is also sinister at the same time. I really like it, and I love all the crew. And there's some classic lines from Tom Baker, one of which is actually even on this list. You know, the one where it's, you know, you're the perfect example of the inverse ratio. Funny line, I love that. Talons of Wing-Chiang is also, despite it being a very controversial story for multiple reasons, I still think it is a very good story and a very solid story of Doctor Who. Yes, it is very of the time. Yes, it is quite racist. It is. We can all agree that it is racist. But does it mean it's a bad story? No, it doesn't mean it's a bad story. It just means it's obviously dated. We shouldn't say things like that and do things like that, obviously. But does it mean it's a bad story? No, I think all the side characters are great. I think Magnus Greel, fantastic. Mr. Sin, fantastic. You know, I think all the characters are done well. Set in Victorian London. The Sherlock Holmes style outfit for the Fourth Doctor is great. The updated effects on the giant rat in the sewer, done really, really nicely. It's a very cheesy story. It's a six-parter, but it never drags. I like the gloomy atmosphere as well. It's all done very, very nicely, and I think it is a fantastic story, despite, obviously, it having dodgy backgrounds and, obviously, it, yes, being a bit of a racist story. Horror of Fang Rock, I think, is also a good, great story of Doctor Who. The only story on screen that we have for the Doctor fighting the arch rivals of the Sontarans, the Rutans, which we did get a redesign in the Season 15 collection box set of the Rutans. Why can't we get the Rutans back? Like, every time we see the Sontarans, we talk about the Rutans, but yet we never get to see them. This is the only time we get to see them, and you only see the actual Rutan creature itself for a little bit. It spends most of the story possessing people or taking on the shape of other people, and it all takes place in a lighthouse. Really good. Again, like Talons of Wing-Chiang, gloomy atmosphere, very sinister, very dark. Also, everybody in this story doesn't make it out. The only ones to survive this story as well is the Doctor and Leela, and I think that also really hits you, and I think it is really, really good. Love it as well. Fantastic story. Highly recommend watching Horror of Fang Rock. The Invisible Enemy. I also think, personally, this is a really good story. This is the first story, I was about to say only story, this is the first story to feature K9, played by the amazing John Leeson, and the Doctor spends most of this story fighting for control of his mind because he gets possessed by this creature known as the Swarm, or the nucleus of the Swarm. There's a bit of an episode where they got to duplicate the Doctor, and they do like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, where the Doctor shrinks, goes into the Doctor's mind, and has to fight the infection from within. It's really, really interesting and good to see, obviously, the Doctor being the antagonist, so to speak, for the story. making Leela have to take charge and fight on her own. A companion which at this point, you know, doesn't really seem to use her brains much. She's more brawn over brain, so she had to use her brains. So I think that's done really, really nicely and really, really well. And teaming up with K9 is fantastic as well. Fun story. I definitely recommend it. Image of the Fendahl. So here we go. So from this point onwards now, I know this looks like I'm being a bit biased, but from this point onwards now, there is a lot of stories that I'm a very hit or miss on. Starting with the Image of the Fendahl. Unfortunately, I know a lot of people do like Image of the Fendahl. I'm actually not a huge fan of Image of the Fendahl. So this is the first story for me that's actually going below okay and is going into the bad category. That's probably going to cause some uproar maybe, because I know some people love it. I just can't connect with it. I've watched it 3 times now, and every single time I've watched it, I watched it once on DVD and twice on the Blu-ray box set. Every time I've watched it, I've just struggled. My attention's gone elsewhere. I can't connect to the characters. Not really a huge fan of the Fendahl or the Fendaline creature. I mean, the Fendaline creature's not too bad, I suppose, but I'm just not a huge fan of the concept, and it's a very slow-paced 4-parter for me, so I'm not a huge fan of it. The Sunmakers, I think, is okay. I know, obviously, some people are a bit up in arms on the Sunmakers, but I think it's an interesting one. When they say that Doctor Who's gone too woke or too political nowadays, can we please turn our attention to stories such as The Sunmakers, which is all about taxes and taxing people and forcing people to work, people not getting paid enough, people getting paid too much, the higher-ups and the lower class. You know, it's very political, you know, so Doctor Who did political stuff, but obviously they do it in a different way. But this is a fun story, and it's quite a comedic story as well, you know. I thought it was interesting. Not a great story, but okay, passable. I've watched it a fair few times, and I found myself decently enjoying it, which is why I put it in okay. Underworld. No. Can we put Underworld immediately down here, please? I don't think a lot of people would disagree with me on that. Some people might put it in either okay or bad. For me, though, Underworld is terrible. I recently rewatched it on the Blu-ray box set. I've watched it recently with my fiancé as well. It's just a slog to get through. We weren't even paying attention to it after part 1. Part 1's alright, but then as soon as they land on the planet, they go into the planet and you've got all the blue screen, green screen backdrops, and they're running around this cave system that obviously they're not actually in. It looks awful, and the pace goes to a dead halt, and it is the longest 4-parter ever. Not a fan of Underworld. Very dated, very for the time. You shouldn't criticise classic Doctor Who really for the effects, because obviously it was from the 60s, 70s and 80s, so it was a different time. But I'm sorry, this story in particular was the biggest insult, I think. I mean, I have to. It was awful. It was difficult and really challenging to watch. Invasion of Time. I have a bit of a weird relationship with Invasion of Time. I think Invasion of Time's okay. It can debatably go in bad. I have a weird relationship with Invasion of Time. I actually like the Sontaran bits. So, like, the first part of the story, where the Doctor's really weird, because he's obviously, for the first half of the story, he's sort of president, and he is sort of like almost betraying Gallifrey. He's letting this this species of tinfoil-looking creatures invade Gallifrey, take over. He's being very mean. He's horrible to Leela. He's horrible to his own people. It's really weird what's going on with the Doctor. And then they end up lowering the barriers, the Sontarans invade, and then it becomes your generic Doctor Who story, Base Under Siege style story with the Sontarans on Gallifrey, which is interesting. They also then spend a lot of the last couple of parts in the TARDIS, going around the TARDIS corridors. You get to see a lot more of the TARDIS, even though obviously it's obviously clear that that's not the TARDIS. But I love the swimming pool setting. I thought that was really cool. The Sontarans are very clumsy. Trips over some deck chairs and stuff, falls into some plants that the TARDIS has. Yeah, I have a weird relationship with it. It's also Leela's last story and K9 Mark 1's last story. I don't believe the romance that Leela gets in this story, and her reasoning for staying is not justified, in my opinion, and isn't very good. It felt very rushed and silly. But it's an okay... So it's just the Sontaran stuff that saves it. Otherwise, I would say it would go probably lower. The Ribos operation, oh, now you're going to find that I have a bad relationship with the Key to Time. I am not a fan of the Key to Time. The Ribos operation is going down here alongside Image of the Fendal. I'm really not a fan of the Ribos or Ribos operation, however you want to pronounce it. Yeah, the first Key to Time is boring. They introduce the concept of this big long story arc, you know, where the Doctor's got to search for these different segments of what's known as the Key to Time, keep them out of the hands of the Black Guardian, while the White Guardian, being the good one, is sending the Doctor off on this quest. He gives him, we have a new K9, he gives him a companion who happens to be another Time Lord, stroke Time Lady, known as Romana, to help him on his quest. I don't believe the relationship that they have together, which is interesting because obviously Tom Baker did end up dating both of the Romanas through his time on the show, marrying them as well. So he had those as both partners, which I thought was interesting. But I just don't believe the relationship between Romana 1 and the Fourth Doctor in particular. And I think having two Time Lords as your companion Doctor duo and a robot dog that's highly intelligent, where's the audience standing? You need an audience standing, and you don't have that with these, unfortunately. The Pirate Planet I have a little bit more respect for. I think that one's okay. I don't mind that one. The plot, silly. But the Robot Captain, I think, is a really interesting design and quite an iconic design. It's the Douglas Adams as well story, so you get that comedy aspect in there as well. Yeah, you get a bit of a plot twist that actually one of the servants of the Pirate Captain is actually the true villain and was controlling the Pirate Captain all along, and there's a bit of betrayal going on there, a bit of mutiny, so to speak. But yeah, it's okay, but it's better than Ribos Operation. I'm more engaged in that one than the Ribos Operation, but still not fantastic. Same with the Stones of Blood. I know this one can be quite popular for some people, but for me, again, I also think this one is just okay. Not a huge, massive fan of the Stones of Blood. I like the dark, gritty atmosphere, but the whole trial stuff that goes on towards the end really drags the episode down to a grinding halt and really takes you out of the immersion, if I'm perfectly honest. And again, I still don't believe the relationship between the Doctor and Romana 1. It's just not there for me. Androids of Tara. I know for some people they say this is probably one of their least favourites. For me, the Androids of Tara is actually my favourite episode of The Key to Time, and I always have fun watching it. And it'll probably be the first one that I'll watch when I put on the Key to Time box set when it eventually gets released on Blu-ray in the collection range. And I said I love a doppelganger story, and that's exactly what this is. You have a doppelganger of Romana in particular. I really, really like that story. I think it's done fantastically. And it's just a lot of fun. They find the segments of the Key to Time right at the start of the story. And then the plot goes haywire from then. It is really, really good. I personally like it. Power of Kroll then for me is like the Ribos Operation, goes down here. Not very good. I very rarely go back to watch the Power of Kroll. Not a huge fan of it. It's dull, it's boring. The Kroll creature, nice looking design. The effects are not done very well, if I'm perfectly honest. I just don't go back to rewatching it very often. I'm not a huge fan of the later Key to Time stuff. And then the Armageddon Factor for me is absolutely atrocious. I'm not a fan, again, of it. It's a six-parter. It's an absolute slog of a six-parter as well. No, I'm not a huge fan of the Armageddon Factor in particular. Then, at the end of this story, we've then got Destiny of the Daleks in the next season, which, yeah, is not the best. I think it's okay. It's obviously nowhere near as good as Genesis of the Daleks. Obviously, the effects don't look very good. Obviously, Michael Wisher is not Davros in this story. You've got David Gunnarsson instead. He's trying to obviously wear the same makeup and prosthetics as Michael Wisher. It clearly doesn't work. The Daleks are looking battered. You've got two species at war. They sort of mix up that the Daleks are robots when they're not. You got to remember they're driving a tank inside. It's very different. It's confused messaging. And the setting of Skaro, for me, even though it looks nice, it's just your generic Quarry set. It looked a lot more daunting in Genesis of the Daleks, if I'm perfectly honest. City of Death, hands down, is going top of the shop. S tier, brilliant story. Again, Douglas Adams at his finest. Scaroff as a villain is fantastic. The Doctor and Romana are on holiday in Paris. It's a lovely setting. Duggan as a stand-in extra companion is done really well. I love it. And it's just funny from start to finish. Thoroughly entertaining. I adore The City of Death. Creature from the Pit, it's okay. Nothing spectacular. Very run-of-the-mill generic story. The design of the creature is just a giant green blob. It's not very good, to be honest. The setting is okay. The ragweed creatures, it's alright. It takes a place a lot in like an underground cave system. Not a huge fan of it, but it's an okay story. It's passable. Nightmare of Eden. Yeah, Nightmare of Eden is not a very good story either. The Mandrels, even though they're a really nice, fun design, just the plot of the story is weird. You've got this professor guy who's got this device which he's using to hide certain substances on board, and you can travel to different environments through it. It's all about drugs, this story. It's like a drug trafficking story, almost. It's just not done very well, and it's hard to watch. I'm not a huge fan of Nightmare of Eden. The Horns of Nimon is okay. Again, it's trying to be very over the top and comedic. The Nimons are an interesting design. The upper body looks a lot better than the lower body. The other villain is very pantomime, which is, like I said, why it's okay. It's an interesting concept, but yeah, I don't know. At this point, it was hard to tell what Doctor Who was trying to be when you get into the late 80s and late 70s to teetering into the 80s now. Shada, this one might also upset a few people. I also think Shada is just okay. I know there's a lot of people that actually quite like Shada, but I'm actually not a massive fan of Shada. And there's so many different versions of Shada out there to watch. It's hard to know what one to watch. The one I've mostly watched is the animated one where they re-recorded some lines and you got the scene at the end with Tom Baker in how he was at the time in his more elderly form. But yeah, it's okay, but it's nothing outstanding in my personal opinion. The Leisure Hive, yeah, I think we can all agree The Leisure Hive is not a great story. Not the best start to the John Nathan Turner era or the last season of Tom, which I do have a little bit of a soft spot for the last season of Tom. I actually quite like his costume in that season. I thought it was not as bad as what people made out to be, but it's true here that Tom's a bit tired and he's a bit fed up at this point. They even make him to be an old man for a brief portion of the story, which Tom didn't like at all. But yeah, it's not the best. And the episode lengths are all over the place, meaning that the pacing is off. The Famazi creatures look a bit sloppy. I'm just not a huge fan of it. Meglos, in my personal opinion, is actually a little bit better. I actually don't mind Meglos. I think it's a little bit of a fun one. I love a doppelganger story. The cactus design as well is creepy. The music, the tension is really, really good. You also, I think it's Jacqueline Hill also cameos in, doesn't cameo, she comes back in this story, who played Barbara in the first Doctor's era, but she's playing a different character here. It's basically another framing the Doctor, so to speak. Meglos wants to steal this special power source to revive his people and his planet, and destroy another planet known as Tygella. Traps the Doctor in a time loop, disguises himself as the Doctor, goes there to try and steal the source. The Doctor then got to travel to Tygella and try and stop Meglos, and is obviously framed for everything that Meglos did. Fun story. Yeah, it's interesting. Full Circle, I actually think, is a good start to what's known as the E-Space trilogy. So the Doctor, Romana, and K9 travel into another dimension by accident, and they have to try and find their way back out. This also introduces us to Matthew Waterhouse as Adric. The Marshmen, really interesting design, creepy music, creepy atmosphere. I quite like it. I like the Doctor, Adric and Romana and K9 little TARDIS team. I think it's interesting. Even though the Doctor doesn't actually take Adric with him, he's a bit of a stowaway. Which then leads me into State of Decay, which I think is okay in terms of it's a vampire story. The atmosphere is interesting. But overall, the effects are dropping here. And you can just tell at this point, Tom Baker is sort of done. He's not really fully there anymore or fully engaged in the show. Then you've got Warriors Gate, which in my opinion is bad. I'm not a fan of Warriors Gate. It's supposed to be quite simplistic because they travel to the midpoint between E-space and N-space, the normal reality. So there's not a lot going on, and I get that, but it's a lot of white backgrounds or generic spaceship. There's not an awful lot to keep you fully engaged in the story, and so I'm not a huge fan of that, to be honest. And this is also the departure for Romana and K9, and Romana's just staying behind because she just doesn't want to go back to Gallifrey, which you understand, but yeah, it was a bit rushed as well. Romana had been a companion at this point for over 2 seasons, and her departure just felt very like, oh, bye, Romana. And that's sort of how it felt with Leela as well, just, bye, Leela. It was just, oh, okay, you could have done a bit more, especially K9, who had been with us since Leela, you know? Then you got the Keeper of Traken. I think the Keeper of Traken's a good story, if I'm honest. You know, introduce us to the character of Nyssa. You're really getting the Peter Davison companions now. It's just the Doctor and Adric, and then Nyssa comes along. It also introduces us, says goodbye to the Decayed Master and hello to the Anthony Ainley version of the Master, who steals the body of Nyssa's father, Tremas, in order to renew himself. The Doctor and Adric land on Traken to deal with some mysterious goings-on that's happening, because Traken is a peaceful planet that's now under threat, and it turns out that threat is the Master invading. Fun story, good 4-parter, I quite like it. And then finally you have Logopolis, which I think also, like Keeper of Traken, is a pretty good story. A decent send-off for the 4th Doctor. The concept of the Watcher is done really nicely. I wish that would come back in Doctor Who. This mysterious figure that watches the Doctor all through the story and then merges with him at the end. You know, it turns out that's the future Doctor coming back to make sure that the current Doctor goes through the regeneration properly. It's done really nicely. Introduces us to Tegan as well. So you've got the trio of Peter Davison era companions of Adric, Nyssa and Tegan complete. The last thing you need to do is then replace the Doctor, which Doctor has a final confrontation with Anthony Ainley's Master. Done brilliantly. I love the flashbacks to previous villains and companions of the era. All done really nicely and gives Tom Baker a perfect send-off in my personal opinion. But there we are. Wow, very long-winded episode, I'm afraid, but that is going to be my ranking of every single 4th Doctor story. I know there's going to be some stories that you will disagree with, stories that you will agree with, so, you know, but that's just the way that these videos go. But I hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, please like it by giving it a thumbs up and comment down below your thoughts on the Tom Baker era. And in the next video, we will dive backwards again, this time into the era of the 3rd Doctor, played by Mr. Jon Pertwee. So, thank you guys for watching. This is the Nerdy Grail signing out for now. I hope you've had an amazing day, and I will see you all next time. Bye for now, everyone.